Hey everybody, it's me, Root Beer, and we just got some interesting news for stuff coming up in set 13, so I want to talk about it. So, 2026 is going to mark the 5-year anniversary of B era, and it seems like the way they're going to do this is they're creating these phantom units. So, they're taking all of the OG bosses and mixing up all the nations. So, we're getting a new version of Zorga and Magnolia that belong to Brantgate and Stoic and Lyrical respectively instead of Stoicheia. So, we see a version of Zorga who's looking a little more alive than usual, and now he's like a mad scientist, and they turned Magnolia into a marketable anime idol. So this is gonna come with the new plot line for the next season of Divines, where we have this like mysterious fog, a tower, and then they were already saying stuff about like the Crimson Moon. That's something that's been coming up in the lore. So it seems like these phantom units maybe are going to be the next form of reversing. We had all the way back in the OG the reverse units where they turned into Link Jokers. Then we had the mask units during Wildress, and now they're doing this with the Phantom units where they're swapping around all the nations. So that'll be kind of interesting. Divines has been dealing with a lot of like timey-wimey stuff with Erica, so this like what if possibilities for all these alternate universe versions of these cards does seem like a really interesting concept. I think it's going to be really cool. Unfortunately, this proves my theory, which I had come up with and then didn't post before this news came out, which was that the antagonist for this new parallel clash that's coming up in season 5 was going to be retrains of all like old encounter cards like Overlord, Phantom Blaster, the OG OGs, because 2026 is also the 15-year anniversary of Vanguard as a whole, so I kind of figure like what if we brought in all of these old units as a way of celebrating the 15th anniversary? We can maybe get some new parallel versions of those cards as the antagonists, which, usually these seasons don't resolve all in one season of anime. We're probably getting a second season of whatever this conflict will be, so I'm not discounting that theory just yet. Just keeping that in mind. If it ends up happening, I said it first. But yeah, the thing we know right now is they're mixing up all of the OG ride lines, or at least it seems like it, because Zorga and Magnolia were the Stoicheia ride lines from set 1 and the trial decks. And so I anticipate we might be seeing more from like Bastion, Bruce, all those guys. So that being said, there are also some reasonable criticisms of this concept. The biggest one being, of course, just Bushiroad's reprint policy. Because we're now mixing up all the nations, if you're like really devoted to Zorga or Magnolia, you have all the Stoicheia staples, you're not going to be able to carry those into the new nations, right? Zorga, it might not be so bad because Brantgate doesn't have super strong generics. There's like Bulbul Mine, but probably whatever's happening is going to be a little more self-contained. Usually you're going to need some specific set order that probably has its own special quality, and then you're going to need a bunch of support to support said quality, so Zorga is probably not too bad. The bigger one is probably going to be Magnolia. Lyrical is quite infamous for its expensive ass staples. Like, if the Willista ride line ends up being a possibility, that's super expensive. Getting Strega to go along with that is expensive. Yuika is very expensive. Card's been reprinted a million times and still regularly goes like $20 to $30 depending on how good Lyrical is that particular month. And, Franset, which is getting reprinted in set 12, but, see Yuika, it's probably still a $30 card. Now, I imagine they're going to carry over some of the play styles of their original forms. So, like, Magnolia probably will still deal with back row attacking, which means maybe you don't need the Yuika, but it does feel like Bushiroad is stuck in this weird place where if these cards end up being too generic and you need those expensive staples, it's going to be really hard for people to cross over into these other nations. But if they're too archetypal, you end up with a similar situation of things like Vice Ruger or Non Unclear, where it's going to take like 3 waves for them to be a real deck, and who knows if they're going to stay relevant that long. Bushiroad is actually pretty good about following up with the second wave, And it's just after that where it starts to get a little questionable. And of course, there is also the question of what's going to happen to the original versions of these cards, right? Like you have these new Brantgate lyrical versions of the cards, but what about the old Stoicheia versions? We just got Magnolia Patriarch this year. Deck is still kind of developing, needs more support. Like, are we going to get new support for the old versions, or are they going to fall by the wayside? And, aside from that concern, there is also just the criticism. Like I said, Patriarch released this year, so they specifically chose to reveal the two most oversaturated units to introduce this phantom concept. Like, these are now the fifth forms of both of these cards. Zorga Nadir only came out in 2024. Magnolia Patriarch, the newest form, came out this year, 2025. So it is kind of funny, like, yeah, this is the 5-year anniversary of D format. We're having a send up to all these OG boss units, and to demonstrate this fact, we have chosen the two boss units that have not gone away. I think the concept probably would have gone over a little bit better if they had started with something like Bruce or Bastion, who we haven't seen in a while. Like, Danji and Toya have both shown up in the anime, but they haven't done anything. And like Bruce and Bastion haven't gotten any new forms recently, so seeing parallel versions of those cards would have been really cool, whereas with this, a lot of people are just like, oh my god, please, go away. So I kind of understand the complaint there. It is hard to see these two cards specifically and think, like, wow, this is neat. I really want to see more of these guys. But, this is going to be a season long conflict. We're going to get at least two sets of this. And this is only like two out of the six nations being covered for these phantom cards. We are probably going to see more phantom versions being released. So, hopefully once we start seeing the other ones, they'll be a little more exciting. But for now, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye!